Tonight's presenter is a man who needs very little introduction, and as such, he's not going to get much. John Carlton, folks. I'm just kidding. He's John Carlton of the Carlton Law Firm, PLLC. Got to get that PLLC in there. He's from here in Austin. He's been a frequent presenter at many of the safety conferences and workshops. If you've been to one of our events before, you know undoubtedly have seen him before. He's one of the leading experts on ESD law and serves as safety's legislative counsel, thus his purpose here tonight. That means with the legislature around the corner, John is starting to get busy, and he's here tonight to tell us what to expect. John, take it away.
I'm just starting to get busy?
Well, I mean, you're perpetually busy, but
Okay.
starting to get busy with actual legislature stuff.
It is, in fact, the last Monday. I hope to not be working after today for the rest of December. But
Lucky you.
let's talk about the legislature. The legislature is coming, and I think as Cliff put in all the materials for this, the legislature is coming. The legislature is coming. Oh my gosh. It's coming around the corner pretty quickly, in fact, less than a month away. Feels like we've been talking about it for 2 years since the last one was over, but here we are. So, was November 14th. Pre-filing of bills for the 85th session began. On January the 10th, the session actually begins, and it lasts for 140 days. And I fondly recall my father telling me that he wished it was 2 days every 140 years instead of 140 days every 2 years. One of the key deadlines for the session is Friday, March 10th, which is the 60th day of the session. It's the last day to file what are considered statewide bills that aren't local or particularly affecting special areas or get approval from the governor. And then session ends on the 29th, which is, of course, Memorial Day, which means that every 2 years, Memorial Day weekend is simply a waiting game for whether bills pass or die on the vine. Let's talk about legislative statistics, because 2 years ago, when we were facing this upcoming session for the 84th legislature, we weren't sure exactly what was going to happen, but what happened was an avalanche of 6,276 House and Senate bills, only 1,323 of which passed, a little less than 21%. So if you get a bill filed, you got a 1 in 5 chance. The governor did veto 43 of those bills that were passed. We'll see what happens this time. I've been monitoring since the pre-filing date, the 85th legislature, and there have currently been 852 bills filed as of the end of the day on Friday. Don't have the report on what was filed today, but as you can tell, we're off to a rapid start, and I would expect over the next 30 days that number may double before session even gets going, and then within the first few weeks of session, we'll have quite a few bills filed as well. There's some other interesting statistics over there at the House and the Senate. We've had quite a few membership changes. There were 26 new freshmen. If you've been tracking our presentations over the last year and a half, there were quite a number of House members, in fact 18 that retired. Out of those 18, generally all of those seats were filled with the same party with new faces, however. The Democrats overall during the election cycle gained 5 seats in the House, and while that's great for the Democrats, it doesn't mean much in terms of the legislature because there's still 95 Republicans in the House and 55 Democrats. It does mean that there's a little more difficulty getting to a 2/3 majority for the House. But it's quite tilted in favor of the Republicans over there. On the Senate side, there's only 3 freshmen, and all 3 of those freshmen happen to be former representatives. They've come in and filled in for senators that have retired and moved on. There's been no change in the party seats. It's still 11 Democrats and 20 Republicans. So the Senate's going to look very similar, just some new faces based on who's in place now that wasn't. I've kind of got the long laundry list here of who the members are, the new members, and we'll run through it. I'm just going to highlight the ones where there was kind of some competition because that's where changes might be really kind of occurring out in the local races. Lance Gooden is back after a hiatus. He defeated the incumbent Representative Spitzer, who had defeated him in a prior election. The other 3 that you see there on that list all are replacing gentlemen who retired and chose not to run. Terry Wilson, however, in House District 20, defeated Representative Farney. And the others on this list are just filling in for, excuse me, I'll go back. I didn't mean to flip through that page quite that fast. The others on this list are replacing members who've retired and moved on. Let's look at the next page. Some other new House members. There's Hugh Shine, a Republican, defeated Molly White in the primary there. And then the others are just merely replacing existing folks. Interestingly, Mike Lang, a Republican out of House District 6C, is replacing Jim Keffer. Jim Keffer's been a long-time representative who has represented rural interests and been importantly placed within the House for a lot of things, but Mike Lang's going to come in as a freshman, and there'll be a little bit of a change in leadership style there, I think. On the other House side, a little closer to home, in Comal County, Kyle Biederman defeated incumbent Doug Miller. Doug Miller had served for about the last 4 sessions and had a committee chairmanship, but Mr. Biederman is coming in as the representative-elect. There'll be some change there because of Doug Miller's leaving the House. And interestingly here, Victoria Neve defeated Ken Sheets to take over his spot. Ken Sheets had been there for a few sessions as well. Some longtime folks on this table, Marissa Marquez, a representative out of El Paso, had been in the House for many, many years and chose to step down and let someone else take her seat. So it'll be interesting to see what Lena Ortega does. And then Trey Martinez Fisher also stepped down after a long, long time, and so it'll be interesting to see what Diana Arevalo does. A few more, there's just so many changes. There's been a back and forth in House District 117. Representative-elect Cortez defeated Representative Galindo, who defeated him in the prior session. So that district's been flipping back and forth, Republican and Democrat. Been kind of interesting changes there. Kevin Roberts, Republican, defeated Peggy Harless, who'd been in the House for a long time. So that's been an interesting change. And Briscoe Kane, young guy out of the Houston area, defeated Representative Wayne Smith, which is going to be an interesting change there. Representative Smith had been in the House for a long, long time with lots of leadership. Jarvis Johnson out of Houston is replacing Sylvester Turner, who has moved over and moved on in his world. And then another flip from a Republican to a Democrat, Marianne Perez in House District 44 defeated Representative Pena. We'll run through the rest of these. Another interesting one, Valerie Swanson out of the Houston area. This is important for you folks from Harris County. Defeated Debbie Riddle in the primaries, and so she's going to be the new representative for House District 50 and on the west side of Harris County. Our new senators, Brian Hughes, who came out of the House as a longtime House member, is replacing Kevin Eltife. Don Buckingham here in Central Texas is replacing Troy Frazier, and Boris Miles is taking the spot that was filled by Rodney Ellis. So those are the changes on the House and the Senate. Lots more changes on the House side. Percentage-wise, it's about the same in both chambers. I want to hit on this, and I hit on this every time we're here talking about legislative things. You have got to develop relationships with these legislators. They are really easy to talk to. They're interested in their local politics and the local communities and what you're doing to serve your community. It's important that you initiate the contact, though. They're going to be so busy, they need you to reach out to them and tell them what you're interested in. And now is the best time to do that, because once we get into session, once mid-January comes along and it gets more and more hectic as the session goes, it's going to be harder to find these representatives and senators and get their time with you. So reach out to them, introduce yourself, let them know who you're with, what emergency service district you work with, what your district does. Educate them, bring them out to your facilities, or at least bring them some information about your facilities so that they know what you're doing and how you impact the community in a positive way. And then ultimately you have to cultivate that relationship by continuing to keep them informed of what's going on in your district. Good things and bad things. Let them know how it's going. Let them know the positive things you're doing and the struggles you're having as well. If you can create that relationship with your local representative and senator. When bills come up that either positively or negatively impact you, you can have that open door communication with them and really have an impact in how things go at the Texas Capitol. Let's talk a few about some hot legislative issues. Not all of these are necessarily directly related to ESDs, but they seem to be the politics of the day. Tax relief is a big issue. Election reform, particularly given the recent presidential election. Immigration reform, firearms, and municipal annexation reform. We're going to talk mostly about tax relief and municipal annexation reform. Election reform is not necessarily right on target for our ESDs, although it's certainly an interesting prospect. Immigration reform similarly, and the right to carry your firearms if you're licensed in particular locations, while it's interesting and a passionate issue, is not something that necessarily affects our ESDs too much. Let's talk first about tax relief. And the reason this is up there at the top of the list is because Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, and even from his time predating being Lieutenant Governor, has been a strong proponent of limiting local property taxes. He's concerned about them increasing and in multiples and the impact to taxpayers of that. And he believes that the current 8% rollback rate is just too high and has to be reduced. Now, we've had success in talking with his office in the past about the limited tax rate of emergency service districts, and we're beginning that conversation now, again, to kind of make sure that this effort doesn't negatively impact ESDs, and here's why. Senate Bill 2 by Senator Betancourt it's a comprehensive tax relief bill that addresses these revenue caps. It does a number of things, and it's very long and complicated, but in key, it lowers the property tax rollback rate from 8% to 4%, unless you're in an area where you've had a disaster declared, in which case you can have a higher rollback rate back to the 8%. It requires a taxing unit that wants to exceed the rollback rate to have an election. This is different from the way the law has been in place for years and years, which is if you wanted to exceed the rollback rate, you could do so, but you were subject to a petition. This flips the model and requires that if you want to exceed the rollback rate, you have to have an election. And for ESDs with our low tax rates, that's got a potential negative impact because the cost of an election may very well exceed the amount of additional revenue you get when you look at exceeding your rollback tax rate. It makes a number of other calendar changes and just changes in the process for property tax appraisal, generally trying to get certified appraisal records out a little earlier by mid-July instead of late July. But the primary issues are the change in the rollback rate and the requirement to hold an election. There are 35 other bills related to property tax caps and property tax issues that have been filed so far, and I don't expect those to be the last of them. The major issue here, and what we were successful with last session with Senator Betancourt, was the ability to talk to the Lieutenant Governor's office and the Senator's office about this low constitutional cap that we have of 10 cents. And that cap already provides protection from our taxpayers for having to pay too much in local taxes. And so we're going to continue to work with the Lieutenant Governor's office and the Senator to try and create some relief for our low tax rate districts so that we can not be burdened by this by this lowering of the rollback rate and the requirement for an election. The other things that are in, I got 2 slides on that. I didn't mean to have that, so I apologize. There are also 15 bills related to sales tax exemptions that are out there on the tax relief side. Anything from feminine hygiene products to particular hunting equipment on certain days of the year, and it's really kind of interesting to see how all of that plays. But those sales tax relief efforts may impact many of our ESDs who are dependent upon sales tax revenue to help keep their services flowing, so we'll keep an eye on those. Let's talk about municipal annexation reform, because this is another big issue that's coming forward from a prior session. And Representative Larson out of out of San Antonio has filed House Bill 299, which rewrites the Municipal Annexation Act, and it restricts the ability of cities to annex property. It does so by requiring that a city can only annex area with a population of less than 200 people if there's a petition that's signed by more than 50% of the voters in the area or more than 50% of the property owners. And so that petition is what starts the annexation process for cities. It then goes on to say that a city can't annex an area with less than 200 voters unless it gets the approval of a majority of the voters voting at an election. If a petition protesting the annexation was signed by 50% of the voters who voted in the most recent municipal election. So it's kind of a two-step protection. One is, in order to annex area with less than 200 voters, you have to have a petition that comes in. But if you come in and want to annex areas with less than 200 and you get a protest, then you have to conduct an election. And so it's putting hurdles in place to keep the cities from going out and unilaterally exercising their annexation.
I just want to ask this question really quick because I think we'd probably get it at some point. What's the thought process behind the 200 number?
Well, 200's been a break point for annexations. When you get over 200, there's additional requirements and procedures for what cities have to go through to prepare annexation plans. This particular portion of the bill addresses those areas that are not subject to municipal annexation plans and puts instead this requirement that you have an election potentially or a petition in order to annex those areas.
Right.
That's why the 200's in there.
So in the past, 200 and above, they have to go through a pretty detailed specified process in the law. Right?
Correct.
Below 200, they could just grab it whenever they want.
Correct.
Right? This is trying to protect against that.
That's exactly right. And so there are these are areas where there's either industrial or commercial property and very few voters, or there's small land being prepared for development, and it gives those property owners and those folks a right to come in and say, hey, we don't want to go this route and we need you to have an election.
And the important thing to remember is that's something that ESDs have found themselves. A lot of ESDs have that kind of rural, underdeveloped property or even just industrial property where it's susceptible to a city coming out and grabbing it without actually having to go through the process.
That's exactly right, because if a city comes out and wants to annex an area, it's generally because there's development that's going to occur on it, but hadn't occurred yet. So it's a low-density piece of property, and that in and of itself makes it a target for municipal annexation, but this bill attempts to put some procedural requirements in before those annexations occur.
Okay.
So the city, 299 also requires that a city can only annex an area with a population of 200 or more if the city holds an election. And so that requirement is different from the current process, which requires this municipal annexation plan. And if the registered owners, the registered voters in the area don't own more than 50% of the land, in other words, if it's a large commercial tract, then the city has to receive a petition from the property owners in order to be able to annex it. So lots of changes, lots of protections in this bill. In addition, if each owner of the area requests annexation, so in other words, if a city comes in and wants to annex area and the owners actually requested it, I own all the land, I get to negotiate as the owner and enter into a written agreement for the provision of services. So that's a new requirement that would allow these property owners to negotiate how services are going to come into their property. The trick is, if you don't have those services listed in that agreement, you don't have a right to get them. And so there's a lot of education that's going to have to go into property owners as they're looking at annexations in the future, because if this bill passes, they're going to need to be negotiating those kinds of agreements. The city does have to conduct 2 public hearings to have this kind of annexation, but they can adopt their ordinance on final reading at their second public hearing. And then beginning in September 1 of 2017, this primarily affects our ESDs in Harris County and in the Houston ETJ. But after September 1 of 2017, there will be no limited purpose annexations and no strategic partnership agreements requiring limited purpose annexations. So that's a real change in the law. And cities had been, some had argued, using that to gain sales tax revenue without a corresponding obligation to serve. So Representative Larson is really tackling these issues head on. We haven't had annexation reform in the state in probably almost 30 years, since the late 80s. But this is coming. It's the second time through, and I think there's plenty of momentum for it. I think we'll see something along these lines. Towards that end, SAFE-D has actually adopted a policy statement on annexation that will, with the intent of it guiding us through the legislature as we deal with TML and the cities that we interact with. And as I've put up here, our primary issue is we're interested in providing more clarity and certainty for ESD residents facing municipal annexation. And SAFE-D really has a concern for both the residents of the area being annexed so that they continue to get good service, but also the effects of the annexation on folks who are left outside in the ESD after the city annexes. It's an important consideration because cities sometimes come in and they may take a large portion of either the sales tax revenue or the property tax revenue, and having protection and taking into account what the impact of that on our residents who are left behind is important. And so SAFE-D's policy is that we're going to focus on that. Towards that end, we're going to seek a constructive dialogue with municipal interests. This means TML and any of the cities that are interested in this. We'd like to see a 1-year notice to an ESD about annexations in our jurisdiction. That gives everybody a chance to prepare and plan and talk about how that annexation is both going to impact the folks within the area to be annexed and the folks left behind in the ESD. We'd like a requirement that there be an impact study so that everybody has to come together. The city would have to put together an impact study about the annexation, both of the area they're taking in and the area left behind. Those residents left behind we don't want them left out in the cold without adequate emergency services, and that's really the focus of this policy. And if that impact study shows that there's some kind of benchmarks, and we haven't really worked through the details of this yet, but that would trigger some sort of alternative dispute resolution, really more of a negotiation process. When you look at municipal annexation now, when they go through an annexation service plan, if there's a disagreement on a municipal annexation plan, you go to mediation and you negotiate what services are going to be provided and how that's supposed to happen. I think we're looking at a similar process here.
I want to walk through this just real quickly in the event that this got a little verbose.
Me get verbose?
Well,
come on.
Yeah, no, not you.
All right,
I'm saying whoever came up with some of this.
Can't imagine a lawyer being verbose.
Now, what we're trying to do basically is to say to almost, we're not trying to stop annexation, right?
Right.
We're just trying to pump the brakes on it in the event that, say, a city comes out into an ESD and says, we're going to grab this little portion that is somehow 30% of your tax revenue, 30% of your tax base, and take it away from you, and that's going to leave the 30% of your tax base, but only 10% of your residents. So now your 90%, other 90% of your residents are severely hurt in the amount of services your ESD can provide. And what we're saying is, we just want notice, and we'd like to see some sort of study done that says, well, if it is that kind of severe situation, then we need to sit down and talk about how we figure this out, right?
I think that's exactly right. ESDs and cities, frankly, have worked together on a large number of issues. And this annexation issue is just a particularly tricky one because cities really want the ability to grow. ESDs need the ability to continue to serve their residents and property owners. And so annexation can potentially have a negative and sometimes devastating impact on that. And so having the ability to plan and work together and have this process laid out, I think would be helpful.
Right.
So let's talk about some TML positions, because while we do match up with TML on a lot of issues like property tax caps and the rollback rate and a lot of open government issues, there are some places where we disagree. And so TML wants, and this has been in their legislative program, this is not new, so it is in their legislative program, but it's been in their legislative program for about the last 3 sessions. They do have members who are interested in being able to annex and replace some or all of ESD taxes with city sales tax. So they want to be able, when they annex, regardless of whether the ESD stays in place, to be able to take ESD sales tax. Now, interestingly, we've addressed this 2 sessions ago when we put in place legislation that allowed the ESD and the city to negotiate sales tax sharing. And typically at our conferences we talk about sometimes it's better for the ESD to have part of something than all of nothing. And so if there's incentive to go ahead and reach an agreement about sales tax sharing with a city, then that happens. Of course, TML's position is, well, that's a one-sided negotiation because the ESD has the sales tax, but that's the way sales tax law works within the state of Texas for all jurisdictions. So there's that issue. Another position that we've got a little conflict, once again, relates to sales tax, but it's a little bit different and relates to municipal development districts. Those are a different kind of special district that allows a city to develop infrastructure for particular areas. And if that sales tax is already at the ESD, the city can't gain access to it for their municipal development district. And so I think TML is looking for an opportunity there. And then two last ones, which have once again been rolling forward from session to session. But TML's position is they would like to allow cities to remove themselves from an ESD if the city is capable of providing services. And they'd like to require City Council approval for an ESD to expand or annex into a city's corporate limits or ETJ. Now, the law doesn't allow either of these things at this current time. And frankly, this issue of allowing cities to remove themselves from an ESD could once again, just like we've talked about in annexation, be devastating to an ESD by removing tax base. And those folks that are left behind in that situation, who all voted into this ESD, along with the folks who were in the city, may be left without services if this change is out there. And so that's a really difficult issue, and we haven't seen any legislative movement on this front, but it is in TML's position paper, and I just want everybody to be aware of these particular issues related to ESDs. Now, who are the other players we're dealing with besides TML? I don't want to be picking on TML at all because they are our friends and we work with them on some issues. We do have some conflicts, but we work with them on a lot of things. Other players in the area, Texas Association of Counties, that's all the smaller counties throughout the state, although the urban counties would say they're involved in that too. But the urban counties, the big 5 or 6, have the Conference of Urban Counties, which pushes the issues that are unique to those large counties. The State Firemen's and Fire Marshals Association, obviously those are our friends where we deal with volunteer firefighter issues, and we work with them on a lot of issues. The Texas Fire Chiefs Association, which is all the fire chiefs in the state, primarily a city-driven organization, but it is, in fact, fairly active in the way they deal with issues. And then the Texas State Association of Firefighters, this is the union. This is the association that represents the employees, firefighters, across the state. Primarily driven by the large municipals because that's where the bulk of the paid firefighters are. And then obviously last, the state, the Texas Commission on Fire Protection, which is the regulatory agency. So all of these folks have lobbyists. They're all down there busy at the Capitol, along with lobbyists for the individual cities that are down there and interested as well. So those are the other players on these issues that we're dealing with. Let's see. So our ongoing issues for safety for this coming session, it's always been highest on the priority list is protection of our sources of revenue, whether it's property tax or sales tax. ESDs have to be able to provide services desired by our residents and our property owners. We want local control. We want to be able to let those folks decide how much they're going to fund and what those services are going to look like. So safety's position is to oppose any reduction or limits on property tax, to improve and protect our access to sales tax so that we can fund those services. And you know, the legislature is an interesting place. There are so many ways to kill bills, and there are very few ways to pass them. But you never know what's going to happen when you're down there, and so it's challenging to keep watching all of these. But this is why we have the list of bills. Speaking of that list, I actually sent the list to safety's offices today. It should be posted up on the website of all the bills we're tracking. Of those 852 that have been filed now, I've got about 55 that we're already tracking, and I expect that to probably triple or quadruple before the end of the filing period in mid-March. Some other legislative issues for safety, protection from city takings of revenue. We kind of talked about that in terms of the city annexation and desire to remove territory and get that revenue. And like we've said, the ESDs have an obligation to the residents that are left behind after unilateral annexation or revenue grab by a city. So we want to talk about reforming the city annexation process, not to stop it. We don't want to stop it, but to make sure that those people are taken into consideration. Protection from city attempts to withdraw from an ESD. We really want to promote city ESD cooperation. There's no reason why ESDs and cities can't cooperate and get along, because really, frankly, we're trying to just provide emergency services and protect folks, and not having those artificial political borders really enables us to enhance service and provide better quality service. And along those lines, we also want to reduce that competition for sales tax revenue. If we can begin to find ways to share that sales tax revenue or put it towards uses that are for the benefit of both, then we're in a good place. We do want to clarify and seek some clarification on ESDs determining how services are provided within their boundaries. That's been a little bit up in the air. I think the law is actually in favor of this, but maybe some clarification, much the way we've clarified ownership of assets and some other things in the past. We're still keeping an eye on access to those unappropriated special funds. That was a big issue 2 sessions ago, and last session seems to have fallen off the table just a little bit. But there are some unappropriated special funds out there that could be used to enhance emergency services. And then down towards the end, we want to maintain our education requirements. I think that's been a big benefit to every ESD in the state, to have that training and have their commissioners educated about the various laws and the way you operate ESDs, and getting that education has been a big help for across the state. And then finally, there's some unintended impacts of the repeal of Chapter 776, which was the chapter that was related particularly to small ESDs. Very few of them were there, but there were some unintended impacts of that. We want to clean that up. And then frankly, keep an eye on any other things we need to address from prior legislative efforts. So where can you go to kind of track this stuff? Well, you can go to the Texas Legislature online. It's free, capital.state.tx.us. I don't think they've changed that one to a texas.gov yet. But you can go there, you can set up and track particular bill numbers. The list that's online at SafeD will actually have a link to this site and all the bill information there. You can create your own list, track what you want to do. If you're interested in firearms, if you're interested in property tax reform or immigration or any of those other hot topics, you can track those things, and you can actually set up a little notice and get your emails. And then, of course, SafeD's website resources. If you just want to stay focused on ESDs, head to SafeD at safe-d.org, and you can get your information there. I don't know if we've got questions, but that's a quick run through. I'm not going to run through the list of the 60 bills that are working.
Let's do it one by one.
One by one. We'll put everybody to sleep, and the last Monday will seem interminable.
Exactly.
But I'm happy to answer questions. There are a few bills out there that we talked about, and so happy to field questions if you got them.
Well, thanks, John, for that presentation. I want to real quick throw back up there how you can get to us here in the studio to ask your questions. If you want to call us, you can call us at 512-251-8101. You can email us at safed@texas.net, Texas spelled out. Text me here in the studio at 512-567-0857. Normal text messaging rates apply, and I cannot answer that phone. And you can even fax us at 512-251-8152. So go ahead and get your questions in if you have any sort of questions regarding the legislature, any questions for John. I do want to say this, kind of make a special soapbox appeal here. We need to know about the things that are happening in your area. We're your state association, and we try to represent the entire state, north, south, east, west, big, small ESDs, service provider ESDs, ESDs that contract with their service provider. We want to know the issues that are affecting you so we can be your voice down at the Capitol. So please let us know, either right now is a great time, or if you just want to send us an email at some point, let us know what you're concerned about, the things that are affecting you, because we don't know all the time if we don't hear from you. So please get your legislative issues to SafeD, and we will do our best to respond to those. Let's get to some questions that were sent in during the presentation. I think this is that HB 299, Larson's bill, prospective legislation. So annexation changes would protect areas like long existing MUDs. those kind of changes?
So the issues with MUDs are a little bit different. MUDs actually have a particular annexation process that they have to go through, and the legislature changed a lot of that several years ago, in fact 30 years ago, to require that if a city wanted to annex a municipal utility district, they had to take the whole district and the debt associated with that district. There still now, with this change, would now be an election provision because a MUD's going to have more than 200 residents, and so there will be change, but it'll be a little different for the MUDs based on their history.
Right. Let's talk a little bit about a question that we've gotten in the past, the ag exemption. Mm-hmm. The argument goes something like, ESDs you shouldn't be able to apply the ag exemption to your property value for ESDs because we're still protecting that land. If you get a wildfire on your ag land, we still have to put it out, so you should have to pay for those services, kind of thing. And a lot of these rural ESDs are really interested in possibly removing the ag exemption. Is there any chance that could go anywhere or do anything this session?
That's one of those things where if you've got a good good relationship with your local representative or senator, you can raise that issue because you can explain that locally as to how that's going to happen. There are a number of vehicles being bills that have that address that topic, that have the ability to be amended to alter the ag exemption language, and so it's possible to get that done. I think it's an uphill battle because I still think the rural interests in Texas and the opposition to taxation will make that a very difficult change. However, the conversation's happening now about how we appraise property, how those exemptions are applied out there, who makes those decisions. And so if you can get a phone call in, introduce yourself to your local representative or senator and say, hey, this is our issue. We don't have a lot of money. And the reason we don't have a lot of money is because our property is taxed at a value that's less than 10% of what its market value is. Right. And so I think those initial conversations are important. We'll continue to have those conversations down at the Capitol with others, but it's an uphill battle.
Okay, a question that just came in. The municipalities will be able to take sales tax that the ESD already collects if they annex that area?
So this is a little bit more of a complicated question because it depends upon which area the city is taking. If the area is already within the ESD and the city is within the ESD, then under the current law, the ESD area really stays in and the ESD continues to collect sales tax. But if the city's outside the ESD and it currently annexes into a district to remove territory, the ESD loses that sales tax already. The question of, and what our policy statement relates to, is what's the impact of that? On the flip side, if the city is within the ESD, the cities want to be able to take that sales tax away and have the ESD still be obligated to provide service. That's the change we're opposing because we need those revenues in order to provide service. It depends factually on what your situation is, right, as to the real impact of annexation on your sales tax.
The straight answer is yes. If you're like an ESD that is in Austin's ETJ or something like that, or in the rural Travis County out here, and Austin comes in and annexes in, Austin gets that sales tax.
Austin gets the sales tax, property tax, everything.
But if you're in an ESD like the one we're sitting in right now, ESD 2, which Travis County, which it covers the city of Pflugerville. The city of Pflugerville boundaries are inside the ESD and are covered by the ESD. The situation where Pflugerville could annex further out into the ESD, they'd want to apply the same sales tax that they do for the rest of the city, right?
I think they would, but the law wouldn't allow that, right, unless they remove that area from the ESD, and right now they don't have the ability to provide those services, so they wouldn't. The law would say you can't automatically have access to the sales tax. The law does allow a sales tax sharing agreement, right, to be worked out between the entities, which the city and ESD2 have actually been working on. So,
yeah, you know a little bit about that. Let's see. How likely is Larson's annexation, speaking of ESD2, this question comes from a Travis County ESD2 commissioner, as did the one about the MUDs, and it's actually the same guy.
Well,
how likely is Larson's annexation bill, HB 299, to pass this session?
So my answer to that is that this bill, or a version of it, died on the floor of the House on a point of order. It had enough momentum to make it through the House committee process, the calendars process, the Senate, all of that, and it died on a point of order because of the changes in it. And so I think it's likely that there will be some sort of annexation reform this session. What that ultimately looks like, I don't know. There'll be lots of negotiating between here and there, but I think it's likely there will be some reform, some change.
And we didn't talk too much about the actual process tonight that a bill has to go through to become law. I know you do that as part of some of your presentations, but it's a long, slow journey.
And I think on YouTube you can just YouTube Schoolhouse Rock.
Yes.
For how a bill becomes law, but I mean,
I think they were at the federal level for that.
It kind of works the same.
We need to make a Texas version.
Yeah,
of
U.S.
that
government
cartoon.
If you look, I think the PowerPoint from the legislative warm-up presentation is on the safety website. That safety resources. If you look there, there's an outline of how that process works.
My point there is, it's got some time. As you said, it's easier to kill a bill than it is to pass a bill. You said 299 or a version of that last session got very close. But it is important to understand that all that stuff we talked through has a few miles to go before it actually gets to the level of law. Same thing for HB2, which would the one
SB2,
property
yes.
SB2 that lowers the property tax and lowers the rollback rate. That has to go through a few. And it'll probably go through a few different changes before it gets to wherever it's going.
I think there'll be lots of changes. But the tea leaves right now are, these are big issues and important, and they're going to be discussed. So.
Right. Is that the same bill Jason Isaac is working on? Statewide ESD, question mark.
Is that the same bill? I'm not sure I understand
the
that.
one where the annexation bill, I guess, is what they were talking about.
I don't know if Representative Isaac is working on that particular piece of legislation or not. I do know that it's a particular passion for Representative Larson and also Representative Huberty out of the kind of South Texas area, Southwest Texas, Southeast Texas area.
Okay, if a city takes a portion of an ESD, are they obligated to pay the proportional portion of ESD debt?
Yes. If a city annexes and removes territory from an ESD, they've got to pay for the share of the debt. That share of the debt's only calculated based on property tax, though, and so if it's a sales tax grab, there's no compensation proportionally to reflect that.
Excellent. Any last words before we adjourn for the holidays and don't see anybody till the session? Next time we do this, the session will be gavelled in. Right.
Yeah, session will be gavelled in, assuming the last Monday in January is actually after January the 10th.
It'll be the last Monday in January.
Okay, so just checking.
Yes. The next time you do this will probably be
there. You
well
go.
Into session.
So a couple of things just in the bill list that I was thinking of as we're sitting here. I'm like, I think last session Representative Hernandez introduced a bill for upping the per diem compensation for ESD commissioners in her county. That bill's been filed again. That's in Harris County.
That we should say that actually got all the way to the governor's desk before Governor Abbott vetoed it.
And Governor Abbott vetoed it based on saying, hey, I don't think ESD commissioners in one area should be favored over another. Interestingly, that bill was originally filed as a statewide bill and then narrowed so that it would just impact Harris County.
If you're just hearing about this for the first time, it was a bill, as John said, introduced by Representative Hernandez, who would have brought the per diem. You could get a per diem of up to $3,000 a year. I believe it would have taken it up to $7,200.
Basically, would have doubled it, brought it to the MUD,
which is what MUD directors are allowed under the law, and it would have changed that just for Harris County. And as we said, that bill pretty much sailed through as a local bill for Harris County, and then got to Governor Abbott's desk and was one of those 43 that was vetoed.
Right. Two others that I want to mention. One is a bill by Representative Schofield, House Bill 532, 532 basically says that if you have debt and you're buying personal property with it, your debt has to be limited in term to the life of the property, which we generally advise is good financial planning, but this bill's been put into place. It's been refiled from last session. So we'll see if it goes anywhere.
What would that mean practically? Like if you buy if you buy bunker gear and it has a life?
It would mean that you couldn't, if your bunker gear has a life of 5 years, you can't take a 10-year note out for that. But the other impact would be, I think if that bill passes, you couldn't roll a whole bunch of different life equipment into one note and have it extend beyond the life of the shortest lived equipment. And so I think there's some potential impacts there.
Wow.
And then I also want to bring up Senator Campbell has filed a bill that's a comprehensive reporting bill to the Comptroller's office, which would require public access to information on boundaries, financial and tax rate information to be warehoused at the Comptroller. There's some costs that would be imposed on ESDs in trying to comply with that provision. We already report to the Department of Agriculture on a more limited basis, but Senator Campbell's bill is a much more comprehensive and could seriously impact our ESD's requirement for reporting their boundaries, boundary changes, financial reporting, all that kind of stuff. So that's another one to look at. That's Senate Bill 200. Those are the ones that I just didn't have in my PowerPoint, but wanted to leave you with that you might want to take a look at those and enjoy that reading over the holidays.
I almost got in your shot there.
It's all right.
Yeah, I'm sorry for that, but that me sitting up and getting ready to tell you how to apply for your credit means we're almost done here. Thank you all so much for joining us tonight. Thank you to John, of course.
Happy to be here.
For your presentation as well. There's plenty more to come. It's going to be a long spring.